You know, the key to colonization now, and a lot of you are probably educators and doctors, and me, I'm not the most intelligent person in the world. But the key, the best identifier in colonization is when the people themselves who are subjugated and colonized say, we chose this. And that's exactly what they do. Have sovereignty. We have what we're allowed to have. But we as Osage people, we as Native people, we have to allow ourselves to be colonized. If you as Indian people, if any Indian people, anybody else who wants to help, if you want to say re-indigenization, I don't care. As long as you do it. Because that's what's going to emphasize honor, dignity, and integrity. That's what's going to emphasize respect.
This is a very interesting picture to pick apart. Tom Mix is on the left, one of the great silent film cowboys. White hat, he's the hero, of course. And on the other side is Jim, dressed in a regalia as he never wore in real life, but this is the requisite Plains Indian regalia. What's in the middle of them? The camera. This joins the two of them. The camera will make the cowboy more than he ever was, and will make the Indian less than he ever was.
And this is a photo taken at the residential school in Spanish, Ontario. In the back right-hand corner, you see the little girl with, she's got a friend's arm over her shoulder. That's my grandmother, Norma. She was one of 8 children taken from her parents. They were the chief and medicine woman of the tribe at that moment. They took all 8 kids, the government, put them in Spanish, which was notorious for torturing its children. And I guess ultimately, you know, Cindy gave a great introduction, very flattering introduction, but in retrospect, I think maybe this photo says more about my identity and where I come from than anything you're going to read on the internet. So there's my grandmother, and they did kill the Indian inside her. She never went back to her community. She lost her language, so I don't speak Ojibway either, neither does my mother. But I like to think that she'd be very happy that I'm here today, and I'm certainly speaking using her voice today. So, all movies that tell the stories of contemporary Indigenous life, the contemporary results of colonialism, and about our existence here. And again, that's all pushing back against the history. It's not why these movies were made, it's not why Chris made Smoke Signals, but that was one of the effects that film ultimately had. You know, ultimately what's really important, and Cindy got it right, I do love movies. And one of the reasons I do is because they travel the world in a way that no other art does. They're seen by people and they can communicate ideas to people regardless of culture all over the planet. And they were and remain the most pervasive art form of the last 100 years. There was no more art form consumed than movies in the 20th century. That's why the damaging movies of Hollywood were so damaging, because they were viewed by so many. And films increasingly become less about the resistance against Hollywood and cinema history, as they're about asserting Indigenous stories within their own tradition. So what you start to have with the Indigenous New Wave is you have a body of work for which these filmmakers can rely on. So when Alan East started making movies, there were no other Indigenous filmmakers for her to look to and say, that's what I should be doing. So she just went out and did it. What you have now, though, is you have a whole tradition that can be built upon. So you have other films that current filmmakers can look to and begin to adapt those into their own storytelling. And so you start to have Indigenous people truly telling our own stories and not refracting or reflecting those through the experience of colonialization. So these are movies that are devoid of any of that history. And in that way, they're actually the most activist cinema. They're the films that, in fact, resist and, I would say, destroy the ultimately Hollywood image of the Indian, because they are so not concerned at all with that point of view. They completely rise above it.
This note was on the letter, the questionnaire that was sent out from Carlisle in 1911. It said at the bottom, thrifty. It didn't say many, it said thrifty lost custody of her children. And that's why I got involved in my grandmother's life, because I wanted to tell her side of the story. It was also, my grandmother had purchased a movie studio from a gentleman called Ulysses M. Daly, D-A-L-E-Y, and I guess he had studios because it was plural. And she was making movies with Cecil B. DeMille and Will Rogers. And my mother was, like I mentioned, she was 10 years old, and my mother and my aunt were in one of the movies called The Prisoner. I've never been able to find any information on it. But my grandmother had a picture, a large picture of the three of them taken when they were in the movie, but when my grandmother passed away, it got away from someone in the family, and I've not been able to find it. So that was really exciting for me because I feel like, wow, there she was, a woman. She was a Native American woman, and owned a movie studio in 1925, and we're dealing with these men, and it just really showed me that she was way ahead of her time, and that she was a very, very good businesswoman.
Everything on the internet works off of aggregates and these formulas and stuff, and so the more indigenous content, original indigenous content that gets pushed up onto the internet, it starts to tip the scale. So the places that house the content that we want people to see, they compete in a more even platform than the stuff that we don't want them to see. And so when a teacher who knows absolutely nothing needs to put together something about Indians, and they go onto Google and they type in Native American, which I've been doing for the last 10 years, just to see what happens, that scale slowly starts to tip as more Native news organizations become kind of take up a larger bandwidth on the internet. There's short films, there's all these other different media components, visual images, photographers, stuff like that. That really starts to tip those scales within the Google algorithm systems. And so when people, if they're in a state of complete and absolute ignorance, they're more likely now, today, to find something that we actually want them to see, as opposed to only being bombarded by things that we don't want them to see, which are exactly like what he's talking about, the Indian mascot stuff, which pretty much functions as a advertising campaign against all Indians at every level between professional, college, and high school. So national campaigns, regional campaigns, and local campaigns, where those Indian mascots function to suppress all actual indigenous identity at every single level, and they're completely embedded in the community. When we go after that one at the top, and you slowly start to extract that stuff, then we can start talking about the stuff that's in those movies, so that that conversation moves forward instead of, like he's saying, I'm sick and tired of talking about representation stuff. I've been doing this for like 10 years now, and I've only been out of college for 10 years, so it's stupid.
I've learned so much from all of you today. I take it with me. I wrote down so much. I feel like a secretary. I'm not going to use it for anything. It's just something for me to carry and up here. I wish I could say more, but I'd be standing here for hours and I'd be divorced from my dearly love. So thank you. That's all I can tell you.